Okay, let's back up a little to situate ourselves. Today's daf is 96, but let's back up quickly to 95b. About 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 lines from the bottom. Abai Savala Karbiasha. So we're discussing the exemption of the shoel, the borrower, of Baal Avimo. If the owner is with him, then he is, while the damage occurs, then he's not responsible. That's his only out. So when does the owner have to be with him? We have a machlokas. Is it at the time of the borrowing or the time of the incident where it's damaged? So by Sela Korbiosha, by Hozoi Korbiosha, Matais Korbiosha, and interprets the psukim. Baal Aveni Moshalim Mishalim. The owner is not with him, then he pays. Tama Delese Bitervayu. The reason that the Torah says the borrower is responsible is because the owner isn't with him at both times, the beginning of the loan and the time the damage occurs. But if he's only there for one, pater, then the exemption of Baal Avimo applies and he's not responsible. But there's another pasuk that says if the owner's with him, he doesn't pay. So Tama de'ise b'tarvayu. So in other words, it's a repetition, the negative and the positive. But again, he explains that when is the if the owner is with him, he does not pay. If ise b'tarvayu, if he's there both times, he's only there one time. One of those times if he was with him at the time of the loan, then the exemption applies even if he's not with him at the time of the damage. And if he was only there with him at the time of the damage, then he still needs to be with him at the time of the borrowing. So it's the time of the borrowing that he sees as key. Rava Savar like Rabbi Yonasan. Rava 96a. Rava Savar like Rabbi Yonasan. Rava holds like Rabbi Yonasan. Umataris Likar Rabbi Yonasan and explains the psukim as follows. Tanya. Brisa says, "Im ba'alavim alei shalim," dealing with the same pasuk. If the owner's with him, you don't pay. Mashman yisubitarvayim means if he's there for both times. So he agrees that if he's only there for one of the times, then no, sorry, he doesn't agree. Then pater, then he's still pater. Uksiv balav eni molei shalim mishalim, and then the other half of the pasuk is if the owner is not with him, he has to pay. Mashma d'leisei b'tavayu, he's not with him at both times. Mashma nami d'chiise b'chado d'leisei b'chado, if he's there at one time and not the other, then chayav, then he's liable. Lamer to tell you, haya imo b'shashela, if he was with him at the time of the borrowing, and tzarich liyos imo b'shash v'ur mesa. He doesn't have to be there at the time of the damage. But if he was with him at the time of the damage, he still had to be there at the time of the loan for the patur to apply. So Gemara says, I could say backwards, right? Like, why do you pick? Like, there's no indication which is the key time to pick, right? Is it the first time or the second time? Is it the time of the borrowing or the time of the damage? Why would you pick one over the other? My answer is it makes sense to say that it's the time of the borrowing that is preferred. Because that's when you transfer control of the animal or the thing that you're borrowing to the borrower. So that's the time which makes more sense. The says, you could say the opposite. Maybe it makes more sense to say the time of the damage is when the owner has to be with him for the exemption to apply because that's when you become obligated to pay if there's an onus, right? So like that seems to be the crucial time. Where it says no, ilo she'ela shvur mesa mayavid. No, because if there weren't borrowing, you wouldn't even have gotten this far, right? So the borrowing itself, the Gemara contends, is the key time. That's when the obligation stems from, right? From the original, from the borrowing itself. So Gemara says, well, you could see the other way. Elav Shur Mesa, it hadn't gotten damaged. Then if the damage hadn't occurred, we wouldn't be talking about this at all, right? You borrow something, you return it. We wouldn't be talking. It's you could say the key Crucial time is when the damage occurred. That's when the owner has to be with him for it to be a valid exemption. So Gemara says, "Afilu achei she'ela difa." Okay, like, all right, I see it, but I still say that the time of the borrowing is really the critical time. Shekain chayav bimzon aseh, because something else happens then. That's when you become responsible to feed the animal, right? If I borrow a cow, I have to feed it, right? I can't give it back to use, starve to death, right? I have to obviously have the obligation to feed it. I accepted that obligation when I borrowed it, so that's when that's the critical time, the crucial time to determine. That's when the owner has to be with him in order um, to make this. If the owner is with him at the time of the borrowing, then whenever the damage occurs, then you're off the hook, which is kind of surprising, right? That's what we end up with. Because if I were to wake you up in the middle of the night and say the Patur of Balavima, when does it apply? When does the owner have to be with the borrower at the time of the lending or at the time of the damage? Like, it seems logical. It seems I would have said at the time of the damage, but that's not where the Gemara ends up. Rashi Amar Kra. Rashi said you don't have to rely on this logical derivation. You can find it in the pasuk. V'chi shalish meimreu. If a person borrows from his friend, v'lo re'ehu imo. Um, um, that sounds like me'im re'ehu sounds like he's not there. Okay. Uh, so yeah, I'm not sure like how you see that from the pasuk. Um, maybe it's the extra word me'im re'ehu. I don't know, but Rav Ashi takes this to mean to imply that that the borrowing from this verse, from this phrasing, that the borrowing takes place without the owner there. Shalim shalim, then you pay. Hareu imo patur. But if, on the other hand, so when do you not shalim shalim? When do you not pay for accidental damage? When the owner is indeed with you. So he gets it from a pasuk. Fine. So Gemara says, "Yichachei, wait a minute. Balav enimo v'im balav imo lamali." So then the Torah goes on to say, if the owner's with him, if the owner's not with him, right? Why is it being specific? If you're trying to tell me that we already figured this out from the earlier pasuk, then why does it have to go into such detail? So where Vashi can answer, you love Hanach, not for those two verses of Amina Hai Arche de Krahu. I would have thought that, that's just that you couldn't derive anything from that phrase. It's just a normal phrase. But once we get into Balavimo Shalim Shalim and Balavimo Lo Shalim, then now we go back to that original verse, and we see, it's at the time of the she'ela that the Baal Avimo, that's when it needs to apply. Okay, now we're going to move on to more questions about she'ela. Questions about she'ela. That's a pun. Questions about borrowing. Rami Bachama asks, She'ela Shala L'Rava. If you borrow an animal to have sex with it, Mahu. And then something happens to it, an accident happens to it. Do you still have the exemption? Kiddush Shailin Sheibinan, does this rule apply only to like normal loans, the usual type of loans, in Shea, but this is certainly not a usual case. Oh, Dilma, or maybe the reason is Tamamai Mishum Hana. Why do you have the exemption in the first place? Because the shoel is getting the use of the animal. So it doesn't matter if it's a illicit use or an illicit use. He's getting, it may be illicit use, but he's getting use out of it. And that's the reason why there is such a rule of balavima. So it would apply here too. Okay, next question. Shala leros bamo. What if you don't really need to use the animal, but you just want to look good, right? You want to have a nice horse, right? It makes you look rich. Maybe you're going to the bank, it's like driving a nice car. right? Maybe you want to look like an affluent person to get credit, or some other reason, or maybe to impress somebody. So mamona beina v'ha'ika. Like, so do we say that, look, you borrowed something, it has value to it, whether you use it or not makes no difference. You still have the rule of balavima odilmar, maybe mamona dis lehanamine bina. Maybe it only applies to when you're actually going to use the thing. But if you're just using it if you're just standing around with it and not using it, like, oh, there's no such hana here, so maybe it doesn't apply. Next question. What if you borrowed this animal in order to do a work that's the value of the work is less than a pruta, so it's not really mama. So mamona beina vika. So do we say that, well, okay, so it's less than a pruta, but there's still value there? Like, it's not a measurable value, but there's value, so the regular shayla rules apply. Or dilma kol pachos mi pruta lo, or maybe we don't consider less than a pruta to be anything. And next question, Shoshte paros lasses ben pruta. What if you borrow 2 cows, okay, and the value of the work you're going to do is worth barely a pruta? So there is a shava pruta here, but if you split it among the 2 cows, then each cow is doing less than a pruta of work. Mao, what's the rule? Do we say, look, you doesn't matter how many animals you borrowed something, and you did the work of a pruta, so it should be a pruta? Or do we say, oh, Dilma, Zilbas or Paros, go by the cows. You borrowed 1 cow to do half a pruta's work and the other cow to do half a pruta's work. And neither one has a shava pruta's work in it. So again, we don't have answered any of these questions. Now, some more questions. Shalom Yishutfi. What if you borrow from partners? Okay, so who has to be with you? Do both have to for the exemption of Bala Vima? It does have to be both partners or just one of them? V'nishalo echad, and one of them was with you at the time of the law. At the time, yeah. Ma, what do we say? Kuli balavima. When you say balavima, it has to be all the owners have to be with you for the exemption. Valeka is not the case. Dilma me'ahu palga didei me'ab miftar. Or can you say, look, all right, I borrowed from partners. They're 50-50 partners. One guy was with me when the accident happened, so from him, I'm off the hook. So I'm off the hook for 50% of the damage, right? Okay, I have to pay the other guy 50%, but at least the guy who was with me at the time of the loan, his part of the damages I am exempt from. Okay, or shutfin shashalu. What if 2 partners borrow from a cow from one person, right? V'nishal echad mehan, and the owner is with one of the borrowers at the time of the loan, right? Mao. Okay, kulo shoel bina. Do we say that for the exemption to be effective, the whole borrower, meaning both of the partner borrowers, have to be there, the leka, and that's not the case. So Dilma Bahi Palgan, at least half of the loan for the half of the guy who was there at the time of the transaction, maybe that's Balavimo for half of it. Next question, Shalme Isha. You borrow from a woman, Benishal Bala, and her husband was there at the time of the loan. Isha Shashala Venishal Bal. Or if a woman borrowed a cow, for, let's say, for Nichsemelog, right? It's her field that the husband gets the fruits of it, Venishal Bal. And the husband was there at the time, Mao. Does that count as Balavimo? Kinyan Paris King Kinyan Guga Damayolo. Do we say here the question is it's the do we say that the payros, that the produce, the ownership of the produce is enough, or does it have to be the ownership of the Karen of the principal? I'm Ravina Larashi, and none of these questions have an answer. I'm Ravina Larashi. Ravina asked, Omer Lishlucho, you say to an agent, say Vishali in Parasi, go and I'm lending my cow to somebody, and you go and deliver the cow, right? You be the Baal of Imo, like you be my representative there. Does that count? Baal of Mamashvina. Does Shlichus count here? Or do we say, does the actual owner have to be there? Veleka, and he's not. Odilma, Shlichus Shalim Famosa. we have the usual rule of shlichus that if you send an agent, then that's like being there yourself, the which is the case. So this we're going to try to answer. Only Ravacha Bereda Rav Aviel Ravashi, Baal Plukta Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish. Anything having to do with the husband, the case of the husband and the wife, that's the previous two questions. That has to do with the argument of Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish. Shaliach, and the last question we had about the agent, Plukta Rav Yochanan from Rav Yosha. That is relevant to the argument of Rav Yonasan and Rav Yosha. How the Gemara explains, Baal Plukta Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish. What is that argument? Itmar. Person sells a field, but he's not selling the principal, the actual land. He's selling the benefit of the produce of the field. Rabbi Yochanan maybe Vikare. So what about Bikurim? Who is the one that is responsible to bring Bikurim? Rabbi Yochanan says the buyer. Right, he's the one that brings bikurim. Reish Lakish Amar maybe veinakari. Reish Lakish says not so clear. He has to bring the bikurim, but he doesn't say the parsha, right? Arami Navi that you read when you bring bikurim. Why not? Rabbi Yochanan maybe vikari. Rabbi Yochanan says you do kina peres kina guftame, because he's like the sale the sale is just as effective or just is on the same level as if you sold the actual land. Now, the issue with Bikurim is that that you have to say Biarti HaKodesh Min HaBayis, that you have to say like you refer to it as your field in the declaration, right? So Rabbi Yochanan says you can refer to it as your field because you brought the produce. That gives you enough of a stake in it to call it your field. But Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish maybe you bring the Bikurim, but you don't read the parsha. Because it's not really yours, so you can't say it's my field. So you don't read the Bikurim declaration. So the same would apply to the case of Baal Avimo. Does with the woman and the husband, does the ownership of the husband's ownership of the produce of the Nichsei Milug, does that entitle him to say this is my field, and so by extension he would be the Baal for Baal Avimo or not? And what about the other argument, Shaliach, about an agent? Plukta Yonasan and Rav Yoshia. That's Rav Yonasan and Rav Yoshia's argument. Tanya of Brisa or Lapot Rabos, if you say to an executor or someone who's looking after a field for you or property for you, right? If my wife makes any vows, like I'm not going to be around, but I'm appointing you from while I'm away. I'm authorizing you to be my agent in annulling her vows. And then that took place. You would think maybe that works. The Torah says no. The husband is the one that has to either establish or affirm or annul her vows. You're Rabbi Yoshia. That's Rabbi Yoshia's opinion. In other words, he says you cannot discharge or make a shliach for this kind of obligation, or this kind of right. What are you talking about? Everywhere else we say a shliach is just like the person himself, so it should be no different here. And you can have the administrator, your agent, annul your wife's vows while you're not in town, or for whatever period you appoint him for. So that the same thing will apply to Baal Avimo, right? Whether if according to the latter opinion, Rabbi Yonasan, shlucho shalom kamoso. So if the agent is there at the time of the loan, that's good enough to invoke the exemption, and Rabbi Yoshia would disagree. Excuse me. Amar of Elish l'Rabba. Elish says to Rabba, Omer la'avdo. If you say to your Evan Kanani, say v'hishalim parasi, you go be my agent, be there, be present when my cow is being lent. Have it. What about that? You make an Eved Kanani or Shliach. So this is even a question. If you say Shlucho Shalom Kamoso, that an agent is good for all purposes, you could still ask this question. And or you could ask the question regarding someone who says that Shliach is not valid enough. So you could ask, according to the one that says the shaliach is always valid. Somebody who is, who's in the parsha, right? Who's subject to this law, right? Aval Eved, but Nevek's not bar mitzvah. He's not, part of the civil laws of the Torah. Lo, maybe you can't make him a shaliach. Or maybe even if you say a shaliach doesn't count, maybe it counts here. Hanimile shaliach. Maybe that's just a regular person who you're appointing the shaliach. Aval Eved, yad Eved, yad Rabo Davia. You have more, you could say there's more of an identity of the slave with the master because you own him, right? And we have the principle yad eved yad rabo. Whatever the slave does, it's like the owner did. So maybe you could say it's more relevant for the slave. So Rav answers, Mistavra yad eved yad rabo damya. I think it makes sense to say that it is more relevant, and the eved, even if you say that a regular shaliach doesn't work for Baal Avimo, but an eved Kanani does work. Okay. Why Rami Barcham? Back to Nichse Milo. Baal b'nichse ishta. You have the husband who has the nichse milog of his wife. The wife owns it, but the husband's entitled to the payros. Shol have socher have. What is his responsibility to the wife? Is he considered like a borrower or a renter? Good question. In other words, if some some onus happens to the property, a hurricane comes through or whatever, so do we have the rules of a shoel that a shoel is not responsible unless Baal Avimo, or do we have the rules of a socher who's renting and then he is responsible for certain kinds of damages? Rava says, you know what? He's so smart. Rami Raham is so smart, but because he's so smart, he spoke too quickly. He made a mistake. Manashach. You could go either like what do you how are you figuring this out? Ishal have a she'ela b'balim. If he's a shoel, balavimo, right? Like he was there at the time of the wedding. And if you say he's a socher, schirus babalim. It's a case of again you're there at the time of the renter, and this exemption applies also to a renter. So maybe that wasn't really Rami Rachama's question. What he's really asking is, what happened here was the man, he's not married. He rents something from this woman, and then afterwards he marries her. So is he considered a borrower or a renter? Is he a borrower? So the so when they get married, it's like now it's becoming borrowed. The original rent deal is now subsumed under their marriage, in which he takes control of the property for Peros. And so he becomes a shoel. Or maybe the original deal stands. That original deal stands. Just because they got married, that doesn't change the terms of the original deal, and he's still liable as a socher. So Gemara says, okay, but still, like, what's the question? Even if he becomes a borrower. But he was there, like they got married, right? So you have the Baal Avimo exemption. Mafka schirus shelo b'balim. So the fact that the fact that he was there and this becomes a borrowing, that overrides the schirus shelo b'balim, the original rental where he may not have been there. And even if he is a renter, schirus b'balim, then this new renting, the schirus shelo b'balim, Teisei Schirus Bebalim, this new rental agreement, as it were, um, uh, takes place and displaces Tepu Schirus Bebalim. Like, even if you consider it Schirus, like the terms have changed, because now, now now they've had a wedding, they've gotten married, and so um, we consider the act of the marriage to be a Baal Avimo, even if you don't consider it a new Sheila overriding deal. It's still schirus. The schirus still gets overridden. It's like a re-renting of the item. So how do we explain the Ravi Rahama's question? Kugon to Agrai Parmeelma. What happened was the woman rents a cow from somebody else, okay, before they're married. So then they get married. Right? According to the opinion of the Rabbanan, Shalom Mishalim was that the borrower pays the renter. Like, if I rent something and then I lend it to you, then the Shalom Mishalim was then the borrower pays me, and I pay if I'm responsible, and then we determine if I'm responsible to pay the owner. So there's no question there. So in that case, you say this is a case of borrowing while the owner present at the marriage. What's the question? Leave it to Rabbi Yossi. When who says that the ultimate borrower has to give it back to the original owner? That's the question he's asking. Okay, so he's asking Shal Have, is the husband considering a borrower? And so he has liability, or is he considered a renter who's not liable for accidents? So Rava says, Baal lo shol havi lo sochavi. You know what? The husband, he's in a whole different category. You're not considering him a borrower or a renter. He is like a purchaser. And so he has no liability. Mid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, to the owner. Mid Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. We get that from Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. But Usha Hiskinu, there was a rule made in Usha. Ha'isha shamachor benichse milog b'chaya bala. A woman has benichse milog. Husband's still alive, and she sells the property, Mesa, and then she dies. Habal motzi miyad l'kuchos. The husband can confiscate the property from the buyer, because he had rights that were sold. He was kind of like the owner, right? The woman didn't have the right to sell it. So we see that the husband is more like a buyer. He has the rights of a buyer, and so his earlier purchase, as it were, overrides the second buyer. So we would say the same thing here, that in the case of Balavimo, it's not even relevant to ask the question. He's like, the husband is like a buyer.
But didn't we say here that the woman borrowed from somebody else? So that if she borrowed from someone else, or she rented, then it still belongs to the original owner. So now, if the husband, quote unquote, buys it because he buys the woman's property, she still as an obligation to the person for whom she either borrowed or rented.
Yes,
Then whatever.
yes,
So
but the question,
that's
you're right.
This question is a little different.
You're right, but we're not talking about whether he's exempt. We're talking about who is the Baal for the purposes of Baal Avimo. Who is the owner who has to be there in order to activate this exemption? And the answer is that the husband is the owner, because he is like a purchaser, right? So it is the husband who has to activate the Baal Avimo exemption. So we're not saying that the guy doesn't get his field back, because the husband assumes the same responsibility that his wife had, right? That he has to give it back to the person. But the question is, what about the Baal Avimo exemption? So who activates that? And the answer is, it appears to be the husband.
But I'm still, I hear that, but still, even with the Baal Imo, the original owner is not there, and the property still belongs to owner A from whom the woman borrowed or rented it. So how can you really say that the Baal Imo is there? Because it's not really the husband's property. It belongs to owner A. The husband just acquires the woman's rights to whatever she owns, but the real Baal is the person for whom the woman borrowed it. I mean, this is a big jump here to say that the husband now becomes the Baal Imo.
Okay, nonetheless, okay, I hear you. There's a jump. But now that we have, I'm guessing here, but I'm guessing that now that we have this idea that the Baal is like the purchaser, then what about a regular case where there's no previous, it wasn't borrowed from anybody, it's just Nixay Malog, and you decide to lend it out to somebody, right? Who's the Baal? So it sounds like the husband is the Baal, because the husband is as if he purchased it from the wife. He really has the ownership of it. Again, I'm extending what the Gemara is saying here, but that's what it seems to me.
That seems like a reverse case. She has Nixay Maluk from wherever she is, and then they're lending it out.
Yeah.
Then
Maybe it could be either one of them.
yeah, I don't know that. I,
Yeah, I don't know. Gemara doesn't discuss that. But I see your question, but that's what the Gemara seems to be saying, that yeah, we do take that leap. Baal b'nichsei ishto mi moal. What about meila? Right? If you have nichsei melug, and meila is done with this with the property. Who's responsible? Amarava man limo, limo bal. Who like who would you say it is? Limo bal. Could you say it's the husband? The hetera nichale delikne, because because he wouldn't want to acquire that level of ownership of like when he when he assumes, when he gets married and assumes control of this property, he would only accept that if it were legal property, right? Not hektish property. He wouldn't want to accept Meila stuff, right? So Timali, but what about the wife? Should she be the one? The hetera nami lo nichola delikne. Like it's not in her interest. It's not so great for her that the husband is acquiring the use of the nichsemi log. That's the rule, but it's not like she wants it to happen, right? So if you're going by who wants it to happen, she doesn't want she doesn't even want the husband to get the permissible stuff, right? The non-milog. So nimalu basting. So maybe it's the basting that is that becomes responsible. But that doesn't make sense either. When the rabbis made a takana v'amru baal lokeach chave, and said that the husband is like a purchaser lehetera, like the decree, the rule that there is such a thing as nichsei melog, that was only established for property that is really owned by them. But but they wouldn't make the husband responsible for the takana nichsei melog. Maybe it doesn't even apply according to the rule. However, Rava answers baal mal l'kishayotzi. There's no meila at the time of the marriage, but if the husband uses it for his own benefit, then that becomes meila. Just like any other person who, if you take coins from hekdesh, you're not liable until you spend the coins, until you use them for something. Okay. Another question.
but there's still Meila though, right? I mean, they took the price. There is hektish within the Nixay Maluk, mixed in there somewhere.
Right. So we're saying that nobody's responsible for it until somebody actually uses it and gets benefit from it. But just the transfer of it it doesn't really take effect because it's hektish, right? So if somebody goes and actually uses it, then that constitutes meila. But the fact that that the property automatically gets transferred, ownership wise, we don't hold someone responsible for that until he actually uses it.
I thought we learned in many places if someone takes hektish, that's meaning, right? Once they've taken something from hektish.
Right, but that's if it's an active taking, right? But here, nobody's done any action to the let's say it's land, coins, whatever. It's a safe deposit box. Nobody's gone into the box. It's just the ownership formally gets transferred to you, but it's not like you wanted it, like you wanted to do it, or that you accepted responsibility for it, right? You got married, and then this rule kicks in, but you didn't actually take it, right? So in that case, it's only once you go and use it that that meila starts. But
How,
I agree with you that
how the
if
wife
you
get
went,
the how did the wife get the hektish property? How did she get hektish property in the first place? It's transferred from the wife to the husband. How did she get this property that is hektish?
Mhm. um,
Who gave it to her? I
well,
mean, did she take it?
maybe she got regular property and she made it hektish,
Oh,
and then the husband takes it, as it were, right? You can make something hektish, right?
right.
That's fine, but then you can't give it to somebody else. But she got married, and by getting married, it effectively got given to this other guy. But he didn't like buy it, right? He got all he wanted to do was get married, right? It's like he doesn't. It's not. It's not. We're not saying that he automatically acquires it in the way that causes him to be transferring hektish to his property. It's only once he uses it that we say, aha, now we see that you're taking something from hektish. But just the legalistic transferring of the property to his name doesn't take effect. Again, if he had gone and purchased it, that's a different story, right? But here it's ancillary to his getting married, and it's only because there is this rabbinic rule saying, "Oh, you got married, you get her property," right? Um, but we're not going to apply that to Hektish unless he does something active.
But marriage is a kinyan, right?
Of the woman, yeah.
And everything that she owns.
Well, so
Yes.
but that's through a rabbinic inaction. So we're saying that the rabbis do not apply that rule that they made if it's a case of if it would cause you to violate Meila.
All right.
That's what we're saying. That's
Okay.
exactly what the Gemara says. Ibailahu, another question. Kachash basar machmas malacha. Um, so the animal is doing the work, right? And it like it wears it gets worn out, right? It's now been worked hard, and it's not as valuable, doesn't have the same capacity for work. So what about that? Is the borrower liable for those damages? Some of the answers. Rav Chilkia Breder Rav Avia Shmei was Rav Chilkia. Bichlal Dechi Mesa Malachas Malacha. Like if you would say that this depreciation is the responsibility of the borrower, then what happens if it dies? So Mechayev, right? If it dies, not through whatever, not through some negligence or whatever, but it dies because it got so worn out that it died, right, from doing the work. So then you would say Mechayev. So the borrower should have to pay. But name a lav lokma bechilta shilta. But you should say, well, the borrower can say, listen, you knew I was going to work the animal. The animal died because of work, right? So if you're going to say that depreciation applies to the animal, then 100% depreciation should apply as well. But we know that's not the case. Lo mibaya kachash basar machmas malacha. In other words, not only is the potter. Not only are you potter for the depreciation of the animal from working, even if it dies, you're still off the hook. Because you can say, I didn't borrow your animal to not use it. You knew I was going to use it, and therefore you're potter, and you're also potter for any depreciation less than that. However, there was a guy who borrowed an axe. Itbar, and the axe broke. Also coming to Rava. They went to Rava. Amalei, Zilai Sisadi Dulav Shanis Bay. Like go bring witnesses that you were using it properly, that there was no negligence. V'ivtar, and you'll be off the hook. The Elek Asade Mai, so Gemara says, okay, what if there are no witnesses? Well, then what do you do? Tashma, let's bring a proof. There was another case of a guy borrowing an axe. V'itbar, and it broke. Also coming to Rav, they came to Rav. Amalei, Zil Shalim Le Nargamalia. Go buy him another good axe. Amalei Rav Kana, Rav Asil Rav, so Rav Kana protests. Dina Hache, is that the law? B'shasik Rav didn't respond. V'hilchasa. So in other words, he's like, okay, maybe I made a mistake.
Why can't he take a shvua that he used it for regular purposes?
Why can't you take a shvua? That's a good question.
B'makom she'ein edim, you would take a shvua.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So does shvua shomrim apply to a shoel? Like this is kind of like in its regular use. Yeah, you would think there would be a shvua, right? It would make sense. Mm. Hmm. So look at the first Rashi. So what we're talking about here, according to Rashi, is the difference of value between the broken axe and the new axe. And Abaye, or I
Which
mean
Rashi?
Rav's,
Which
the
Rashi is
top
that?
Rashi on 97a. Like they're asking Rav, you really have to go out and buy him a new axe. But we have a Mishnah. Gabi nizakin tashlimin ezek malami shabali metaplim ben avela sheshamin lo avela shal behamto shemesa. In the case of one animal damaging another or killing another, so you actually evaluate the dead animal, umosif umishalim demand, and you make a payment to make up the difference, right, between the dead animal and the live animal. But you don't have to go out and buy him a new animal. That's you just pay for it, right? So what Rashi's saying is that they're asking him, like, really, you're going to make the guy go out and buy a new axe? Like, you should just have to pay him the difference between the damaged axe and the new axe. And Rav, by not responding, apparently conceded that yes, maybe he was incorrect in sending that guy out to buy a new axe. He should have just paid the difference in damages. And that is indeed the halacha. Rav was mistaken. You can give him back the broken axe, and you just have to make up the difference in cash. How governed the shal dalvla mechavre? There was a guy who borrowed a bucket. Itbar, and the bucket broke. Also, the Papa. They went to Papa. Amalei, I see study Lishani Spay. Bring witnesses that you were using it properly. Viftar, and you will be off the hook. So I guess the same discussion would apply, and we'll pick up here tomorrow.
All right.
Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.